Please make gasho. May the sacred presence of the one who said he would abide in his teachings be our guide. May we follow his glorious example and tread with unfaltering steps this noble path, till we too shall attain enlightenment. All Buddhas throughout space and time, all honored ones, Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, wisdom, Nyan, wisdom, Maha, Prajna, Paramita. Good evening. It's a joy to see you all tonight. And what I would like to talk about tonight, I want to do a little bit of a talk and then a little bit of discussion. I like conversing with you all. What I want to talk about tonight is Fusatsu, or a ceremony that we call Fusatsu, partially because we have started offering a Fusatsu ceremony every other month at Wy'East. Right now we're doing it on Zoom. And we've done this once. And the next time we're offering it is tomorrow night. And somebody said, hey, why don't you give a talk on Fusatsu? Maybe that'll help people understand a little more about it, give it a context, perhaps make it more accessible because it's not quite so scary if there's some sense of familiarity. So that's what I'd like to talk about tonight. Sound good? All right, I like the head nods. Thank you. So Fusatsu, someone earlier was talking about the word, and Kimio had put it in the chat box to spell it. In English letters, it's F-U-S-A-T-S-U. And that's a Japanese word. It's a transliteration of posada or upavasada. And this is a word that harkens back to the old renewal of vows ceremony. And there's a long history of Buddhist monks, Buddhist participants engaging in a renewal of vows ceremony. Sometimes in certain places they're done once a month on the full moon. Sometimes they're done twice a month on the full moon and the new moon. When I learned this ceremony, we did it once a month. Right now we're offering it every other month. So there's nothing magic about the time. However, it's nice to do it on a somewhat regular basis because there's an aspect of accountability to the ceremony that comes into play. You know, and in our Mahayana teachings, I mean, certainly in the old Buddhist teachings, our old Indian masters, you can look in the Pali Canon and the Vinaya, the monastic rules, and you'll see references to these ceremonies that are both confession and repentance and renewal of vows. And the idea was that you couldn't renew vows until you had become ritually pure. And so part of this ritual purification is confessing of wrongdoings. And so there was this ritual developed where wrongdoings were confessed and then the vows were retaken. And like many of our ceremonies, over the centuries, as Buddhism traveled from country to country, forms got changed and details got changed a little bit. But the heart of it is still the same. There's still this sense of renewal of vows. There's still this sense of confession and repentance. And so here we have sort of this idea of a ritual from millennia ago. And some of what I want to talk about is how we practice that today and why we practice it today, why might be of benefit to a person's practice, or my practice, or your practice. So let me tell you a little story. This is a little story from today. So it's a brand new story. It's not in my notes. I'm going off script. Little story today. Today I stayed home from work because I had a migraine last night and I wasn't feeling really good. But I was somewhat functional, and I had made an appointment to speak to a sister of a patient that I had seen earlier in the week, just to offer support. The sister was having a hard time, and chaplains offer support to family members as well as to patients. So I called her up this afternoon and was having a spiritual care visit with this person via phone. And she started telling me about her stresses and her struggles. And one of the things she was struggling with was she was feeling pressure from a coworker to get a COVID vaccine. And immediately I had opinions about this. And immediately my opinions about this were also met by my sense of professionalism and wanting to support this woman, even if some of the choices she was making were not the choices that I was making. So all of a sudden, as soon as she said this thing, I had an inner conflict. Oh no, what do I do? So I tried to find a way to meet her as a human being without taking a position of, yes, you should get a COVID vaccine, or, no, you're right to refrain from that. So trying to find a middle path through that. It was difficult, and I felt somewhat okay with how I handled it after the conversation. But it's still lingering. Like, I'm bringing it up during a Dharma talk, so there's still something in me that's holding on to that. So let's take that little story and just set it aside. I'll come back to it. Fusatsu. In the way we undertake this ceremony at Wy'East these days, given that we've done it all of one time so far, this was a form that I learned when I first started practice at Dharma Rain, and it's a form that's in my body. Dharma Rain has changed the form a couple of years ago slightly, and I still find the new form a little jarring. So when Shintai and I started talking about offering Fusatsu at Wy'East, this is the form that seemed most natural. It's a very, it's well suited to small groups, and it's very intimate and connecting. And what we do, I'll sort of describe the form and then explain more about it. The way it works is the whole evening is more formal than a Wednesday night. So when you come here, when you log into Zoom on a Wednesday night, there's some social time. We get to talk to each other. Then we sit, and then we have breakout rooms. We do some more talking with each other. And then usually we have a talk or a book group, and then we talk to each other more. On a Fusatsu night, it's a little more formal. We come into the Zoom room and preferably hold silence until the service starts. There's a recitation of the Kyoja or the 16 Bodhisattva precepts. So right from the start, we recite the precepts together. Usually whoever's leading Fusatsu will have the mic and everybody else is muted, but still reciting at home. And then we sit zazen. So we've got half an hour to sort of reflect on the precepts, reflect on our own life, find some stillness, become somewhat centered. And then there's a little bit of a switch as we shift from zazen into the Fusatsu ceremony itself. And there will be recitation of the confession verse. So for those of you who have gone through the Daijikai ceremonies or have done Fusatsu, it's a call and response. So the leader would say the first line, all my past and harmful karma, and hit clappers together. Then everyone at home repeats that line, all my past and harmful karma. Born from beginningless greed, hate, and delusion. Another clappers, and everybody would say, born from beginningless greed, hate, and delusion. Through body, speech, and mind. Through body, speech, and mind. I now fully avow. I now fully avow. So we recite that verse, which invokes this sense of karma as beginningless and a sense of, here am I, this embodied human being. I have inherited karma from the limitless past, and I still have agency. My actions matter. Your actions matter. What we do with our life and our energy matters. Causes and conditions. The things that we do have an effect, which then is a condition for the next moment. Actions have more effects. They ripple out. So we recite this confession verse, and then whoever is leading Fusatsu will recite sort of the ground rules. And we do this every single time, so everybody hears it every single time. There's no crosstalk. So it's not a conversation. Each person has an opportunity to speak to something that is going well in their practice and something that is a challenge in their practice. So we meet both the confession side of it, but also there's a celebratory side. Our society is so geared towards guilt and shame that it's easy to get caught in the what I did wrong. Oh, I screwed this up. I did this wrong. I broke that precept. I'm still struggling with this, that, and the other. But it's also important to learn to see the things that we do well, where we did move in harmony with someone else, where we did act in a way that was kind or compassionate or generous. So each person has an opportunity to speak from their own position, using I statements, talking about their own practice. We don't comment on somebody else's practice. So if somebody else articulates their offering in Fusatsu, and it makes me think, oh yeah, that reminds me of my day, or I should say something so they know, like we don't give advice to each other. After each person has an opportunity to speak, there's sort of if we were in person, we would have a little incense box. And each person, before they spoke, would have an opportunity to offer a little bit of loose incense. And then there's this beautiful symbolism of burning, of purification, with being able to offer incense. And then the incense box would shift to the next person. After everybody's spoken, the incense box would go in the middle. And then if somebody had one last thing they wanted to say, they could just put their hands in gasho and speak what needed to be spoken. And then at the end, there's a dedication of merit. So with almost all of our practice, really, any merit that accrues from the good karma we create through doing our practice, that merit gets dedicated to others. So once again, there's a dedication of merit at the end. So in a way, it's a very simple ceremony. And at the same time, it can be very profound. Part of what we do in this ceremony is that we are speaking in Sangha. We have our Sangha members with us. We can be seen, which takes vulnerability. And we also get to witness others in their vulnerability. And as time goes on, we get to know people through their, through what they say in Fusatsu in a different way. So for those who have sat sesshin, think about what it's like to sit with someone for a week, not speaking to them. And at the end of the week, having that sense of like, I know this person. I know how their body moves. I know how they sigh in the middle of zazen. I know the sound of their knees cracking as they get up. There's an intimacy there that is not dependent upon chit chat or socializing or knowing the details about somebody's life. So going back to my story about this conversation I had, trying to support a woman who is struggling with aspects of her life, who's making choices that I wouldn't make for my own life. I'm watching my own inner conundrum about that. And if that was what was arising for me during Fusatsu, I might say something like, today I was struggling with right speech, or today I was working with praise and blame as part of the challenge to my practice. It might be that I was feeling good about that conversation, and perhaps I said something else for my challenging aspect. And for the celebratory side, I might say, today I was able to support someone I disagreed with, honoring their humanity. And so when we offer something like this in a Fusatsu ceremony, allowing ourselves to be seen, also seeing ourselves clearly, there's something simple that gets articulated that goes beyond the story, because it's not about the story, really. It's not about the details or the struggles or the she said this and I said that. It's about narrowing down to what is the essence of my practice right now? What is the essence of my practice today? Where did I lean in? Where did I try to hide? And then bringing that forward with a sense of authenticity and a sense of transparency for you all to see. And this isn't a ceremony where you can find the right thing to say, because there is no right thing. And if you make something up, nobody will know. So it's all about, what are you willing to? What are you wanting to? What are you feeling safe enough to bring forward? And then the group holds it. It's received in silence. And there is something very sweet about speaking to a group and having what you say held in silence. And it stays there. So given this story, if I run into someone from the Sangha on Saturday who was at that Fusatsu ceremony, and they say, hey, I want to tell you something about that story you said in Fusatsu. If I introduce it, that's my way of signaling, okay, I'm fine with this being a topic of discussion. But otherwise, it just gets to stay. And if I had just said it the way I had articulated it, I'm struggling with right speech, or I felt good about this, you might not even really know the details to come up and say, hey, what about? because all I said was right speech, or I did good. I saw someone in spite of having a judgment or an opinion. And in a way, allowing ourselves to be seen like this in Sangha over time, at least for me in my practice, it has allowed me to gain a sense of trust in others, that I develop that sense of, this is the place where I feel safe. And, for each of you that may or may not happen, but for me it did. Because I could say I was struggling, and that was just accepted. It also, for me, helped with articulating my own sense of integrity and finding that sense of being able to assess my practice in a way that is not self-deprecating or self-praising. Over time, it helped me see my practice clearly because I could hear what I was saying in Fusatsu over time. And I could see some of those changes. There's something very, it can be a ceremony that is very clean and crisp. So I think I put in the blurb for this talk that I wanted to invite people who have done this ceremony to speak about it from their perspective. How it has impacted them, really. But before we shift to a more discussion mode, I just want to extend to all of you an invitation to try this form out tomorrow night if you have the time and the inclination. That your practice is your practice, so you get to decide what you want to engage in. And I want to leave you with a little snippet. So this is the book of, I don't know if you guys can see that. This is the book that Chico has just put together. It's a collection of Kyogen's talks from my teacher. And I was just, before Zazen, we were talking about books, and I said something about liking to have books around, even if I'm not reading them. This is one I've been carrying around, that it's a talisman in a way. This collection of Kyogen's writings, I can hear his voice in them. And some of the talks I remember being present at, and at the same time, hearing his voice. I miss him very much. But this is from a section called Faith. And even though he's talking about faith, it really made me think about Fusatsu. So I'm just going to read one paragraph. Opening our own Buddha eyes to see Buddhas everywhere. And to see Buddhas everywhere is to become Buddhas ourselves. This is a transcendence, a parting of the veil of appearance for a moment to see the essential nature of that which is right in front of us. Parting the veil and seeing in this transcendent way is a miracle. Roshi Kennett used to say to us, if you want to know what a Buddha looks like, look in the mirror. But you can't leave it at that. If you really want to manifest the Buddha nature in the face in the mirror, then you have to go forward with faith and with confidence. Jump into not knowing. With not knowing and great faith and great confidence, be actualized moment by moment, just as you are. That's the Zen way. So in Fusatsu, we jump into not knowing. and that we recite the Kyojikaima, the precepts. We sit down. We have half an hour in Zazen to let the mind settle, clear, see what we're struggling with, see what we're doing well with, and distill those down to their essence and bring them forward to those who are practicing with us so they get to see a little bit into what we get to see. We get to reflect each other in our practice. So with that, I would say, for those of you who have participated in Fusatsu, I would be welcome to hear how this practice has impacted you or touched you in any way. And if you don't want to speak, that's okay. We can shift into questions or comments.
Thank you for your talk.
Mm-hmm.
I think for me, the experience of Jukai was so powerful that I appreciate doing Fusatsu to have a chance to renew my vows. For me, that's always been the like where the energy lands more than kind of a check-in about my practice.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm glad that Wy'East is doing it. It's nice to renew my vows with you guys.
Mm. Thank you, Camille. Other thoughts or questions? Trish?
Yeah, thank you, Jyoshin. I appreciate that. A lot of stuff spinning around in my head, which is okay. Doesn't have a slot to fit in yet. But when you were talking earlier about confession and I guess penance or whatever word you chose,
Mm-hmm.
The first thing I thought of is, and I wasn't sure how that fits with what you said after that. So that I didn't put the two together. But what I thought about was maybe you could talk more about that, because I thought about confession growing up as a Catholic,
Mm-hmm.
and you know, and that wasn't a bad experience for me. It was just as I got older, I thought, this is really dumb. Why am I telling this human being what's wrong with me? I have to make up something if I can't find something, right? Because you have to go to confession. So anyway, I guess my question is, maybe you could talk a little bit more about that, and then how it fits with the thing for tomorrow night.
Yeah, sure.
Dead today.
Thank you. No, that's a great question. I think, like, in the way we're working with sort of confession and repentance, it's less about bringing forward something bad or unskillful to someone else to be absolved. This is more along the lines of seeing clearly our own actions and our own skillfulness and unskillfulness. And then naming them often is a way to release them. Naming them can also be a way of saying, I've done this thing that is unskillful. I vow to do something else which is more skillful. We don't often articulate it that way in terms of, I did this and now I vow to do that. But there is that aspect of seeing clearly harmful acts and making the intention to do something different the next time those conditions arise. And also, there is that positive aspect or that celebratory aspect, which balances the I need to confess. It's also, I need to be seen in my goodness. I need to be seen in my wholeness. I need to be seen in my skillfulness. We have both aspects to our character. And instead of bringing this forward to someone else to absolve, we bring this up to the whole universe, really. This comes out of us and into the world. And, Kemio spoke of renewing vows, and we recite the Kyojukaimon before we sit. We recite the precepts, which are taken in Jukai. But there's also an aspect in the sharing, in letting these aspects of ourselves arise and be released into the world, which is also a renewal of intention. It might not be spoken the same way. There's much of it which is implicit, but there is that intention that gets set. Does that help at all?
Yes, that helps a lot. Thank you. It's sort of like, this isn't the right word, but in my now retired line of work, we used to call it failure analysis. So kind of looking at what didn't work, but with the intention of learning from it. And I don't know, you didn't say that, but that's kind of what went in my brain. And then I thought, it's also the process maybe of letting go and moving on. Like I said, it kind of releases that. So by bringing it up, it releases it, and you don't carry it inside you anymore. You give it up to the universe, right? And then you say something that is really positive and good, that kind of moves you then in that direction. Yeah, it was very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, the way Dharma Rain is doing Fusatsu now, instead of like sitting in a circle and speaking, each person comes up to the altar and addresses the altar and speaks of what is challenging for them, or what is one aspect of practice that they're struggling with. Not quite the same impact as the way we're doing it, but there still is that aspect of bringing something forward, releasing. That's cool. Hi, Mommy. Oh, she's already gone.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
You talk about what aspect of practice is difficult and successful, but then like your story talks about also what things in your life
Mm-hmm.
are difficult and successful. Like, you talked about the person, it was difficult because your views were quite different than this person, but you successfully talked to them, so that is kind of your life, a practice in your life. So am I correct in that it can be your practice, or it can be just something that you're struggling with in life?
Well, Penny, where does practice end?
I'm not sure. Okay.
One of the beautiful things I love about Zen is that it includes everything. It includes all aspects of your life, and it's not just formal practice of sitting in the Zendo or doing Zazen with the group. It's how we engage with each moment.
Okay.
And so part of that distillation is taking experience and looking at it through perhaps a lens of practice. So it might have been, I was struggling with this conversation, but through a lens of practice or a spiritual framing, I label it as oh, this is working with right speech.
Mhm.
So right speech is one of the Eightfold Path.
Right.
Or you know, this is keeping or not keeping the precept about praise and blame. So that's looking at through a lens of the precepts. And so it also gives us a little bit of practice of using that spiritual language to look at our actions and look at the events in our life.
And that's one thing, I don't always remember the language because I don't have the books. I listen and then, I mean, I know what you're talking about when you talk about right speech, but I don't know if I always can pull that out myself.
Penny, if you show up for Fusatsu and you talk about your experience, whatever language you use will be the right language at the right time.
Okay. Now, is the Fusatsu, it's tomorrow night, is it the same time as what we have?
I think it's at 7 o'clock, so it's a little bit later.
7 o'clock, and is it the same code?
Mhm.
Okay,
So we'll recite the precepts, we'll sit for half an hour, we'll do the ceremony, and then depending on how many people show up, that will depend on how long it lasts.
Okay.
If there's 3 people, it's really short. If there's 18 people, it takes a little bit longer.
okay.
But I do hope that because it is more formal, that if people come to Fusatsu, they stay for all of it, and they come at the beginning and stay until the end. That just keeps that container really a really solid practice container.
I have an ill-formed question.
Okay.
So let me try and like hammer this out so it comes up. So I have been rereading the Platform Sutra, and I just finished the section where it's all the stuff about so the person who's featured in the Platform Sutra is writing a lot about the Diamond Sutra, which some of us studied a couple years ago. So there's this whole thing in the Diamond Sutra about emptiness is form, form is emptiness. But that's prajna or wisdom, kind of having that understanding. So there was something about the language. So because this is fresh in my mind, I'm thinking there's no good, there's no bad. Like we have and yet somehow invoking something that's skillful or not wholesome is part of our spiritual practice. Okay, so that's my totally ill-formed question. Can you speak to like where the wisdom of emptiness and this kind of emptiness as form as emptiness fits in with something very concrete, to me, which sounds very concrete, like Fusatsu?
Yeah. So I would say once upon a time, these ceremonies were very I don't want to say transactional, but when monastics broke monastic rules, there may be punishments invoked by the community because there were transgressions. So there was a flavor of transgressions and things that would need to be enacted in order to purify those actions, become accepted in the community again, however you want to label it. So that felt, I mean, looking back on it, that feels very concrete in terms of sort of the meaning and impact of that sort of a ceremony. With the way the Mahayana looks at it, a lot of the oomph of it in terms of repentance and purification ritual comes from, there's aspects in the Platform Sutra for sure, there's aspects from the Avatamsaka Sutra in the chapter on Samantabhadra's vows that sort of impact how Zen looks at Fusatsu today. And looking at it through the lens of emptiness. Yes, we can say our actions are empty, good and bad as a label. Skillful or unskillful are labels. That is one side of it. Seeing into emptiness is seeing into emptiness, and it has an effect. And yet, there are still people in the world who are impacted by our actions. There are still actions that we undertake that ripple out and affect others. And we can apply labels of good and bad. And in order to get through our lives, our relative, everyday, mundane lives, knowing good from bad becomes important. So you can look at it through the lens of emptiness, and like my question for you then is, what happens when you look at this through the lens of emptiness?
There's no dust to wipe away. There's no mirror and there's no dust.
Mm-hmm.
Wipe away.
Mm-hmm.
And so then for me, so that would be like more of an absolute. But
Mm-hmm.
for me, the way I bring it into the relative is more along the lines of what you were just saying, which is, I live in a world where I say things and I do things and we're in relationship with each other and stuff happens and
And you know that stuff that happens, whether skillful or unskillful, does not define you, right?
right, that's what I mean. It's like for me it has the impact of allowing me to relax.
Yeah.
And like it's not totally empty, right? I don't live in a void. I can't do whatever the hell I want. But it's also not everything.
Yeah.
The nature of my mind is much more boundless than whatever I said to one of my students today.
Yeah. If I say I struggle with the precept of praise and blame, that doesn't mean I'm walking around with a little sign that says, like, I'm judging you all the time, or I'm expecting praise all the time. It's not a definitive statement. It is still an aspect of this is one facet of recent experience that has come to mind. It's not, this is the entirety of my being.
It's just always tricky to me because it seems like we're not like bad people trying to get better.
And there's different ways of looking at it at different times of practice, or different phases of practice. I'm clocking that it's 8:15. I'm going to make this one point and then we'll wrap up. That at some times when people come to practice, it's really important for them to know what's skillful and what's not skillful. They can't make those distinctions yet. And so saying everything's empty isn't a good guide. It's not helpful. So we teach, here are the things that we do. Here are the things that we don't do. And then people will come to practice and they'll get all caught up and like, this is the right way to do it. This is the only way to do it. It's like, let's talk about emptiness. And then like, wait, you just told me it was like this all the time. Well, now it's time to put that down and look at this other view. And so this is what Zen is really good at. This is what Buddhism really is really good at. It's like whatever view you're holding, there's always something bigger. And there's always a different way to see it. So we're constantly getting knocked off our seat by life, by experience, by learning, by being human. And so a lot of what we learn is how do we respond when we get knocked off our seat. And that also is life. Anyway, thank you all for engaging in this and listening and asking questions and your comments. I appreciate all of them. They're good stuff. The universe is the boundless sky. Just as the lotus is not wetted by the water that surrounds it, the mind is immaculate and beyond the dust. Let us bow to the highest Lord. All Buddhas throughout space and time, all honored ones, bodhisattvas, mahasattvas, wisdom beyond wisdom, Maha Prajna Paramita. Thank you all. Good night. Feel free to unmute and good night.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you, Jyoshin.
Right.
You're welcome. Good night.
Thank you. That was a good talk. Thank you.
Thanks.